Hello, everyone, and welcome to MarketWatch. My name is Arti Swaminathan, and I'm a reporter. I cover the housing market. So today we're going to talk to Leo Pareja, who is the chief executive of eXp Realty, one of the biggest brokerages in America. And Leo's army of agents work with home buyers and home sellers. So he has a good pulse on the housing market right now. So, Leo, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so tell me about the state of the housing market right now, because what we see from the macro side is, a frozen market, not a lot of home sales, relatively high mortgage rates. So what is the state of the housing market for you right now?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'm actually backstage at our national event, taking a moment to jump on with you guys. And I have a whole keynote about this. So you caught me at the right time. What we're seeing is a hyper localized market. The southwest of Florida, it's probably some of the highest inventory in 10 years with price depreciation of over 10%. And then there's other parts of the country that it's still 3 months of inventory with pretty moderate home price appreciation. So year over year, home price appreciation is below historic averages. And that's because some markets are still growing and some are depreciating. So it is not 2009 or 10. We are not going to see 20%, 30, 40% drops in any market. And so I think that's the most confusing part, Arthur. Some sellers think it's 2021 and some buyers think it's 2008. But the reality, it's neither. And so one of the most interesting things to point out at is new home inventory is almost at an 8-month inventory average across the United States. That's considered a buyer's market, and only 25% of that inventory is delivered. But the reason we count all of it is because it's past that point of turning dirt. Permits have been issued. The builders cannot turn around now. And so if you're a home buyer, I would definitely be exploring new construction because the builder is pretty aggressive on incentives to buy down that mortgage rate. I've seen builders advertising a 3.99 or 4.99 30-year fixed mortgage because they're contributing to do the buy downs. And the other part that I would really encourage buyers to think through is, do you remember the buyers that bought a house in 2009, 2010? It was scary to buy a house back then. And the appreciation they saw went up faster than historical averages. So, I sold real estate for a very long time. And I always encourage people to say, hey, am I going to be in this area for the next 10 years? You're going to be paying someone's mortgage. It's probably going to be your landlord's, and it could potentially be yours. So it's a human decision. Can you afford it? Are you going to be there for 10 years? And the answer is yes. I think you should at least do your research and find out if that is a good opportunity for you. Because if you were to wait 3 years at average appreciation, you would have to have rates come down all the way to almost 5% to pay for that house 3 years later with appreciation and inflation with inflated dollars.
So when we talk about getting a foot on the ladder, one of the curveballs that we've been thrown is the economy, right? So a lot of people are worried about losing their jobs. Some federal workers are already seeing the effects of that, being furloughed right now. So can you talk a little bit about uncertainty and how do you think that's impacting the market?
When you look at unemployment, it's up from last year, but it's still below historic averages. So one of the things that I invite everyone to do is to zoom all the way out, right? Yes, there is uncertainty, but are you in a sector that is losing jobs, right? If you are directly affected, of course that's going to affect your decision. But if you're in a sector that's relatively stable in spite of what's going on, all the headwinds between AI, automation, volatility in the markets, you need to ask yourself, am I going to be living in a similar product 3, 5, 10 years from now? And the only reason homeownership has proved to be one of the biggest wealth accumulators in the US economy, right? If you look at the net worth of a renter compared to the net worth of a homeowner and just hold that out as the single, differentiator, it's 10x. It is, unfathomable in comparison because what it creates is a forced savings account, right? A feature of our 30-year mortgage in this country is called self-liquidating, meaning every monthly payment, part of your payment contributes to the pay down of the mortgage balance. So in a way, if someone were to just move in and make their payment, just like they would as a tenant, if you look up 5, 10, 15 years later, let's assume zero appreciation, which by the way, over a 10-year period, it's never happened in this country. You'll have, saved $50,000, $100,000 when you add equity in. So Historically, looking over 50, 80-year period, it's been a very good long-term investment.
Let's talk about industry movement. So, one of the big things that the industry has gone through is the changes with how commissions are structured, and sellers no longer having to pay their agent, the listing agent, and the buyer's agent, which was a practice that was, one can say, a century old. Real estate industry, when this first came out, pushed back on this, but you seem supportive. So tell us, do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, the changes in commissions that we've
Yeah.
seen?
So one of the philosophies I've had my whole life is like, look, what are the rules of the game? And then we'll just play by the rules of the game. So what happened was there was litigation against the industry. I would still hold what I've said before, which is I'm not sure that the lawyers involved were doing what was best for the consumer versus what was best for their financial settlement. But what I am in favor of is as much transparency as possible. So if one of the byproducts of this entire process and settlement is that buyers fully understand what they're responsible for paying and everything is fully disclosed and there's a commitment of the service that's going to be rendered for the value being charged for that, I'm all for that. So I think transparency is the best thing. I think you put everything out in the light and have as much information available to a consumer. We were one of the first companies to really double down on that, create agreements that were, as I called them, in English, plain English, not legalese, and make it very simple for anyone without a law degree or a real estate license to understand what they were signing prior to in a simple one-page document.
And these are the buyer's agent's agreements that you sign before you hire an agent to show you a house, to go through all of that
Absolutely,
process.
because one of the things that came out of the settlement agreement was you had to sign something prior to seeing houses. So before that, it was somewhat of an informal relationship. Like, let's say you knew an agent, they showed you a house, and before you knew it, they were representing you, but it wasn't a formalized process because the seller was offering a commission. And so that, going back to your point, the sellers are no longer required to do that in any way in an advertisement. They still can, but it's not required to be entering a property into the local MLS listing service, which was part of the process before.
The industry has also been talking about this issue of transparency on another point, which is on private listings. So if you're listing a home with certain brokerages, you might not be able to see that go through to Zillow or Realtor.com, and you only get to see it on a members only platform or something like that. So, Leo, you also have an opinion on this. So tell us, is this good? Is this bad for consumers?
I have lots of opinions on everything, so you can ask me about anything. So, first of all, I want to explain that I believe that sellers should have choice and control over what their wants and needs are. I think that's an argument used by the other companies that are in favor of this. I sold real estate for 16 years of my life. I actually sat at kitchen tables, had buyers in their car, listened to their hopes and dreams. They trusted me with the equity. And what I do know as being a practitioner is across 4,000 transactions I did personally prior to going into corporate leadership, I could probably count on one hand the 4 or 5 times that the subject came up. And it was for legitimate reasons, i.e., I grew up in the DC area. So, a federal judge that, sits over top of RICO cases. They don't want their address or any information about them being advertised on a public facing website for safety reasons. Um, it could be a tenant occupied property where the lease doesn't expire for 12 months and it can't really be shown, but you'd like to see if there's interest in maybe selling it occupied. And you can't enter into MLS because one of the rules of an MLS is fair and reasonable access so no one gets discriminated against. Maybe a new construction that hasn't been built yet or is half built, and if you publish the address, then maybe a curious buyer can show up and kind of wander into a live construction site and hurt themselves. So there are a couple legitimate reasons. But by and large, what commerce has taught us across the world is that having the most eyeballs on any product is the best way to do it. For example, if I were to have a direct to consumer product that we designed, whether it's food or it's a trinket or it's a dog collar, if I were to have an open house garage sale style, I would only get, 14 people to see it versus making an Amazon store, right? Making a TikTok shop store. I just don't understand how anyone can argue that that is better exposure. And when you look at the data, there's lots of third-party information. Zillow's put out an extensive report. Bright MLS, the largest MLS in the United States, has put out a report that, by and large, sellers who have less exposure and don't expose it to the MLS that we enjoy in these United States, it's almost like 17% difference. So I think it's about net execution and helping their sellers reap the most equity that they earned with paying that mortgage and maintaining that property. And it took a lot of energy to get on that first rung of the economic ladder. And when they're going to sell that home and buy their next home, every dollar matters. And we want to ensure that they can capture every dollar available to them in the marketplace.
These are two big, I would say, consumer friendly change discussions that we've been having. Knowing how much to pay your agent for the house and making sure that you can see all the houses and also get the best price available. What do you think is next for the industry?
Well, the next big subject has been consolidation, right? So on September 22nd, Compass made a bid to acquire Anywhere Properties, which will conglomerate 340,000 agents across the globe. It will be the single largest platform. So if we look historically in the United States, when industries tend to consolidate, they tend to consolidate quickly, and then they end up with maybe 3 to 5 surviving players. So you can look at healthcare industry, the airlines, the oil companies, go back to the turn of the 18th century with, the Gilded Age and railroads and everything else. Um, we are the single largest independent brokerage in the United States by agent count. So we are definitely in the running. Historically, consolidation doesn't actually necessarily mean a benefit for the consumer. And what I've said every time I've had a camera recorded on me so very consistently is we will continue putting the consumer's needs first. I think the game in capitalism is to create friction from the process. That's why Amazon's work so well. That's why a lot of meta products have worked so well. And we believe that transparency and data and information in real time is the best way to serve consumers' needs. But, you know, things could change dramatically over the next 5-10 years in this country. And what I've said to my agents, and I just said on stage to 4,500 people, is we're prepared for what anything comes at us.
Going back to the point on stagnant home sales, I found the statistic that was quite interesting. One place we have not seen stagnation, frostiness, is in luxury home sales. So year over year, we see luxury home sales continue to rise. Luxury meaning a million and over in some markets, 750,000 and over in some markets. To me, that implies that the top 10%, they're still buying and selling. But what does that statistic tell you about the state of the market?
It tells me a couple things. One is that we've since 2022, from the runaway prices we saw in COVID, we've had a 54.9 appreciation across the United States. That's pretty crazy, right? So that's one of the fastest appreciations we've seen. Secondly, that also tells me that in the move up buyer category, we just haven't built enough real estate, right? The impact fees, the new construction taxes that go into the municipalities have really stalled growth where we need it. And so a lot of the new construction has been in that second or third move up, typically property. And so that tends to be in that price point. And year over year, new construction price is actually slightly lower than resale. So there's a couple reasons, as you pointed out there. Probably the 10% highest income earners have been less affected in the white collar jobs and everything else. So one of the things that we will continue to see is that each market is hyper local.
To end on a fun note, Leo, you've been a real estate agent since you were 18. Is that right?
19.
19? Oh my goodness. So do you have any like crazy experiences or any houses that you've helped buy or sell that were like really crazy out of the box that you still remember all these years?
Well, yes. I got licensed at 19 years old and lived through the financial crisis. So I saw lots of crazy stuff, sad and scary stuff, and then also fun stuff. Like, for example, I once sold Hungary their embassy. I went to a dinner and I said, "Can someone help me buy a house?" And it turned out to be the ambassador of Hungary. And I helped them buy an entire city block in DC, and it became the new Hungarian embassy.
Is it still the embassy?
It's the embassy. It's the entire city block. It was a original kind of 20,000 square foot home built during the Gilded Age that is still standing, and it's a beautiful building.
I have to ask, what was the commission on that house?
It was a $17 million sale, so it was a very healthy commission.
Amazing. And on that note, thank you so much for joining us, Leo. It was great to speak with you.
Always a pleasure to see you.